In this video, we're going to change forms between decimals, fractions, and percents. And we're going to do this symbolically, meaning we're going to use a procedure and we're not going to draw pictures or grids or number lines, but you can always think of them and think of the ideas that you learn to help you visualize how this works. Now, in general, remember percent means per 100. So if you're going from a percent to a fraction or a decimal, you're going to divide by 100%. And we're going to use the percent symbol here when we write this so that we can keep track of the percent signs and whether we're working in the right direction. And if we're going from a fraction to a decimal, fraction or decimal, to a percent, we're going to multiply by 100%. Okay, so most of this is pretty simple and straightforward. With decimals, we'll use calculators. Sometimes it can be tricky to simplify the fraction, but we'll get the general idea. So first we're given a decimal. Okay, we've already learned how to write a decimal as a fraction. This is 85 hundredths. That's how we read this. So we would put 85 over 100. Okay, and you could think there are two decimal places to the right of the decimal point, and that's how many zeros you'd have in your denominator. Okay, in this case it's easy to simplify, so I'm going to simplify. Remember, 100's prime factors are only 2 and 5, and it's easy to tell whether something's divisible by 2 or 5. It's even or ends in a 5. So since this ends in a 5, I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 5 to simplify this fraction. 5 goes into 85 17 times. 100 divided by 5 is 20. And you can do that division on your calculator if you need to. Now to go from a decimal to a percent, okay, we are going to multiply by 100%. So 0.85 times 100%, and I'm keeping the symbol there because I want to make sure that I know my answer, my final answer is going to be a percent. Now, you may know what this is. When you multiply by 100 with decimals, it moves the decimal point 2 places to the right. Okay, so I'm going to multiply 0.85 times 100. Notice that's 85, and I have 85%. Okay. Let's look at the next one. We have 32%. So to change a percent to a fraction or a decimal, we're going to divide by 100%. So here, 32% divided by 100%. Okay, so I'm writing this as a fraction, but remember, fractions can be thought of as division too. The percents cancel, okay, and notice that's a good way to keep track. Here, when we multiplied, we have a percent left over and we were trying to find one. Here, we're trying to write a decimal, not a percent, and this shows me that my percents are canceling. And we can write this as a decimal. 32 over 32 hundredths is 0.32, but we could verify through division that this is 0.32. Okay. Now we already have the fractional form. It's not simplified right here. So 32 over 100. Okay, and we're not going to simplify in all cases, but in this case we will. I see that they're even, and I know they both have a common factor of 4. That's their greatest common factor. You could divide by 2 twice as well. 32 divided by 4 is 8. 100 divided by 4 is 25. Okay, so all of these forms are equivalent. Okay. Now we're given a fraction. We're going to write this as a decimal and a percent. So let's use the calculator for this one. So remember, 17 over 25, we can think of this as division, and that's how we'll put it in the calculator. And we could write it over 100 and then rewrite that as a decimal. but we're just going to do the division, and notice this equals 0.68. Okay, so now we have as a decimal, and changing from a decimal to a percent is easy, like we did up here. 0.68 times 100%. Okay, remember the 100 moves the decimal 2 places to the right, and we'd get 68%. Okay. Let's look at the next one. Here we're given a decimal, 1.237. Let's start with the percent on this one. Change colors again. Now notice it's tempting to just start moving the decimal maybe to the left or to the right, okay? But you want to make sure you're moving it in the right direction. So most of the time people think of percents as being between 0 and 100%, but we saw that isn't always the case. Using the process of multiplying by 100%, this 100 moves it 2 decimal places to the right, which you could verify on your calculator, which is 123.7%. Okay, so this is greater than 100, and that's why using the percent symbol is helpful, because you see when you multiply that the percent symbol doesn't cancel out like it did in this problem. Okay, now writing this as a fraction, okay, we can use the same idea as we used here when we wrote 85 over 100. We're going to write 1237. Now we need to write the rightmost decimal place. Well, this is the ones place, the tenths place, the hundredths place, the thousandths place. So this would be over 1,000 is the thousandths place. Okay, let's just verify this on the calculator through division. If we divide 1237 by 1,000, it does in fact equal 1.237. Okay, so another way to think of it, there's 3 decimal places to the right. There's 3 zeros here that go in the denominator. And the good news is this is not even since it ends in 7. It's not divisible by 5 since it doesn't end in 0 or 5. So at least we don't have to simplify it. Let's look at the next ones. Okay, so now we have a percent, and the percent has a decimal in it. But we're going to use the same idea, 64.25%. We want to divide by 100% to rewrite the percent as a decimal. Okay, and again, the percents cancel. I'm keeping them there as a placeholder. Okay, and you might imagine what happens when you do this, but let's just verify it by dividing. Divide by 100. And we get 0.6425. 0.6425. Okay, so notice dividing by 100 moves the decimal 2 places to the left, just like multiplying by 100 moves it 2 to the right. Okay, now let's write this as a fraction. I think it's easier to use this value as a fraction. So we're going to write 6425 is our numerator. It's 6,425, and this last place value, it's a tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths over 10,000. Okay, now we can simplify this because this ends in a 5. I'm going to give us a pass on this one. Okay, we could simplify, but the directions didn't say to, and this is getting, these numbers are getting pretty large, so we're just going to leave it as it is. Okay. Let's look at the next one. In our fraction column, we have 2/3. So first, to find this as a decimal, we'll just divide 2 by 3 on the calculator. 2 divided by 3. And notice this is 66666 forever. It has a 7 at the end. The 6's would actually continue forever. This calculator is just rounding here, and it rounds up to 7. Okay, so we weren't told how many place values we're supposed to use, but we're going to use 4. Okay, so that means we would go 1, 2, 3, 4 places. To the right of that is a 6, so we're going to round up. So we're going to round up in the 4th decimal place instead of all the way over here. So this is, actually we'll put approximately. So when you draw the squiggly lines, it means approximately and I'm using that instead of equals because we rounded, 0.6667. Now to change to a percent, I'm going to multiply by 100%. 0.6667 times 100%. Well, multiplying this by 100, we still times 100. Oops, I left out a 6. It will be 66.67%. I left one of the 6's out. I'm sorry. So 66.67%. So one thing I want you to notice here, remember it didn't say what to round to, but I want you to notice that when we had a decimal, we rounded to 4 places. For the percent, it's rounded to 2 decimal places. So if you're ever asked to round a percent to 2 decimal places, don't round when it's in decimal form. Make sure you round when it's in percent form. So if I went straight from the fraction to the percent, I would take 2 divide by 3. I wouldn't round yet. Multiply by 100 to get the percentage, and it's 66.67% to 2 decimal places. Okay, so lots of times it's minor rounding errors like that can make you get a problem wrong, so be careful of that. Okay. Our next percent has a fraction in it, but we're just going to use the calculator. We'll have to be a little bit careful because this is a mixed number, but we're going to say that this is 17 3/5% divided by 100% to write it as a decimal. Okay. Now, here's where this is tricky. Remember, 17 3/5 means 17 plus 3 divided by 5. Okay, so this is equal to 17.6. Okay, so you need to put the plus 3 divided by 5 to get the decimal version of this. Now we're going to divide this, that was the numerator, divide by 100, and we get 0.176. 0.176. And notice the percents cancel. Okay, so it had a fraction in it, but that wasn't that bad. You just add it on your calculator. Now let's change this to a fraction. So I'm going to write 176. And now my denominator, this is 1, 2, 3 decimal places, so I'm going to put a 1 with 3 zeros. Okay, this is even, so we could simplify, but again, I'm going to give us a pass. Okay. And now our last problem, notice our percent is already a decimal. Now I know someone out there is looking at this and wants to write 42 here. Okay, now again, remember this is 42%, and lots of times we think of percents as being between 0 and 100 or between 0 and 1. Okay, but this percent is actually between 0 and 1. So make sure to follow the process and write 0.42% divided by 100%. The percents cancel. And now 0.42 divided by 100 is 0.0042. Okay, so just like it did in the others, okay, changing from a percent to a decimal moves the decimal place 2 places to the left. So here it moved it 2 places to the left. But something about this form, people just want that 0 to 100 value, so they usually move it in the wrong direction. So make sure you're careful. And now we'll rewrite this as a fraction. So our numerator is 42. And notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So I'm going to put a 1 with 4 zeros, which is 10,000. Okay, I'm going to simplify this one because I can do it in my head. They're both even. Divide by 2, so we have 21 over 5,000. Okay, And again, you could simplify these on your calculator. Most of the time with percents, we usually deal with decimals. So you do need to know how to do this, but it's okay that we're not simplifying in every case, although you should if you're told to in a problem. Most of the time we'll just use the decimal forms.